Video games, even when they're about a specific event in history, are not historically accurate. In games, fun must always take priority, and that usually means making sacrifices. First-person shooters, most of all. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it's not what this video is about. Instead, I want to talk about what happens when a game does absolutely everything it can in pursuit of historical accuracy without sacrificing fun. You've read the title, you've seen the thumbnail. I'm talking about War of Rights. In this video, I'll be using excerpts from Civil War soldiers' letters and memoirs to highlight just how good this game is at recreating the feel of Civil War violence. This is, by far, the most accurate war shooter I've ever played. I'd venture a guess that it's the most accurate one ever made. That doesn't mean that it's highly educational. It really isn't. Because we're not seeing things from a top-down view. It's not like Total War or Age of Empires recreating hundreds of pieces on a battlefield and giving neat campaigns that summarize major historical events. Instead, we're seeing this all from the ground. Usually, we don't know where we are, why it's important, or why we're fighting over it. We only know that we need to do it. And this is the first place where the game finds itself well in line with the reality of being a Civil War soldier.
A private soldier is but an automaton, a machine that works by the command of a good, bad, or indifferent engineer, and is presumed to know nothing of all these great events. Samuel Watkins, Company H.
As soon as you start playing, you'll notice a pretty bold choice by the developers. Loading is slow.
Extra fire rate that you'll get because of it. You'll get less weapon sway, so you'll be able to aim more accurately. Yeah, because you'll have less weapon sway, so you'll be able to aim faster, alright? Take off the bayonet, independent fire.
Hands off, boys, independent fire.
Watch out for the people in front of us, by the way.
It takes about 15 seconds to load one bullet into your gun, so you better use it carefully. And if you happen to be loading while under fire, that 15 seconds can feel excruciatingly long.
Our first fire was rattling volley. Then came the momentary interval occupied in loading. The rifles were, of course, muzzle loaders with iron ramrods. The cartridges were new and the brown paper of the toughest description, so that strong fingers were required to tear out the conical ball and the little paper cap of gunpowder. Emptying these into the muzzle and ramming home and capping the piece took time, seemingly a long time in the hurry of action. History of the 35th Massachusetts Volunteers.
Light 'em up, boys.
And once you start shooting, you'll notice something else. You don't actually get points for successfully killing someone. In fact, you won't even have any idea if you killed someone at all. Usually, your enemy looks like a barely visible speck behind a fence, wall, or tree. Then you shoot, and there is such a cloud of smoke that you don't know if he's fallen or not. And the after-game report won't tell you either. You get points for being in formation, for working as a team. Did you kill anyone? Who knows?
We did not know whether to run or stand when Captain Field gave the command to fire and charge the bushes. We charged the bushes and saw the Yankees running through them, and we fired on them as they retreated. I do not know how many Yankees were killed, if any. Samuel Watkins, Company H.
The chaos of battle can present its own problems in knowing if you've successfully hit. Each shot expels a large cloud of smoke, which lingers just long enough to hide your results.
The noise was deafening, and the smoke was so thick that I could hardly see 10 feet in front of me. I felt a sharp pain in my leg, and when I looked down, I saw that I had been wounded. But I didn't let it stop me. I kept firing, and I kept moving forward. John Singleton Mosby, a Confederate guerrilla fighter.
Plus, since you only have the one bullet, you've got to be really choosy about who you're going to shoot. You won't want to take a shot unless you have a reasonably good chance of actually hitting, which is much harder to do than you might think. And even then, you've got to decide who to shoot. A lot goes into this little choice. You might shoot the flag, since that's where the enemy respawns. But you know if you do, some other enemy will pick it up and they'll be respawning again. Plus, the flag bearer is harmless. He can't even melee attack. You might shoot the officer. It could give the enemy team a few minutes of confusion, plus it takes his comparatively rapid-fire pistol out of the picture for that time. But then, that pistol's only a threat at relatively close quarters. And the death of one officer is hardly going to lead to complete chaos in the short time he's gone. Instead, you'll often find yourself doing what Samuel Watkins did, aiming at the guys who might be aiming at you.
I always shot at privates. It was they that did the shooting and killing, and if I could kill or wound a private, why, my chances were so much the better. I always looked upon officers as harmless personages. Samuel Watkins, Company H.
But this is just the shooting. Sure, it's different from other games, but shooting is shooting. And plenty of games have shooting. No. What sets War of Rights apart is the other stuff. So I already talked about how you don't get points for killing. That's not to say it doesn't matter. You can't win without killing. Killing is vital. But you personally don't benefit from it. There's no kill counter, no KD ratio. The only way you get experience and level up is by staying in formation and winning. But more than that, leaving formation is the most surefire way to lose the game. You see, if you get killed in formation, it counts as one death. If you get killed while sort of out of formation, what the game calls skirmishing, it counts as 3 deaths. When you get killed all by yourself, running around like a COD player, it counts as 5 deaths. And eventually, your team will run out of reinforcements. And then you lose. That's why when you play, you'll see players staying together, even as the bullets fly, even as artillery starts blowing them to bits.
The greatest trial of a soldier's courage is to stand in line, shoulder to shoulder, and be shot at without a chance to return fire. You want to run. Every muscle and nerve in your body demands it, but you cannot. You stay because of duty and pride, but the fear is always there. Private Wilbur Fisk, 2nd Vermont Infantry, Union Army.
Obviously, you're not going to feel this as strongly when you play the game, but the compulsion to run is definitely there, especially when you first start. Especially when you're out in the open, which hopefully doesn't happen too often. But just how often that happens depends on your officer. He's the one in charge. It's him you follow, marked for a short time with a star whenever you press T. That means your survival is closely tied to the abilities of your officer, just as much as it's tied to the abilities of your enemy. Because if you want to win, you must stay with your company. And that means obeying your officer.
It did not matter in some organizations who the officer was, from colonel or captain to the last corporal. To hear was to obey, and under such discipline the men became the merest puppets. John D. Billings, Hardtack, and Coffee.
The problem is, just like in the real war, and I imagine any real war, the quality of officers varies greatly. Here, a Union soldier describes the low standards for appointing officers that existed during the first years of the war, but continued throughout, but less so the longer it went on.
In the rivalry for men to fill up regiments, the result often was officers who were diamonds in the rough, but liberally intermingled with veritable clodhoppers whom a brief experience in active service soon sent to the rear. John D. Billings, Hardtack, and Coffee.
And if you join a match with a bad officer, it won't take long for you to figure it out. Standing in the open and doing volleys is usually a clear sign, or the dreaded suicidal charge. You'll hear grumbling from the soldiers around you, but you'll also see endless criticism flowing through the chat box. Complaints about officers were no strange things to Civil War soldiers. In Hardtack and Coffee, we hear that insubordination in the form of backtalk was the most common cause of punishment. Later, in various memoirs, we see more direct criticism.
Many of the officers at that time were perfect fools and cowards. Some got their positions by political influence, while others knew some of the big bugs at Washington, and in this way got a commission. Many a good man has been lost on account of the ignorance and incapacity of the officers. Private Alfred Bellard, gone for a soldier.
But the same is true for the opposite. When you get a good officer who's shouting commands, reacting dynamically to new threats, and calling for independent fire except when the volley makes sense, then you'll know.
Right face, gentlemen.
Right here. Right. Right face.
Behind the Zeppelin, boys.
It's worth taking a moment here to talk about charging. There are a few different cases when a good officer might order a charge. To overtake a smaller enemy force shooting from cover, to end a stalemate as two teams continually trade shots from cover, and finally, desperation. The first of these is always reasonable. A small force behind cover can be a real danger, even to a large company, drawing your attention so you don't notice a flank. They must be driven out.
We pressed forward, knowing our strength far exceeded theirs. The defenders, brave though they were, could not withstand our numbers. As we swept over them, there was no doubt. The victory was ours, and we felt the power of our overwhelming force. Captain John Bigelow, 9th Massachusetts Battery, Union Army.
The second two are scarier. The funny thing is, as a stalemate drags on, you start to think, or even say, why don't we just charge these damn fools? But then when the order to charge comes and you have to leave the comfort of your nice big rock tree, you'll kind of dread it. Charging a fortified position is always a huge risk, and you won't like hearing the order.
The command was given to charge. It was a terrible thing to order a charge on such a position, and every man in the ranks knew it. But we were soldiers, and soldiers must obey orders. We did charge, but it was a slaughter. Sergeant John Worsham, one of Jackson's foot cavalry.
The last kind of charge, one of desperation, occurs only when you have no other choice. Either the enemy is about to win the game, or you are out of reserves and have nowhere to run.
The thought of charging seemed madness. We were so few and the enemy so many. I feared that what we were about to do was but to sacrifice brave men. But we had no other choice. Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, The Passing of the Armies.
If all this isn't chaos enough, soldiers again and again attest to the intense fear inspired by enemy artillery fire, whose shells can blow men into pieces in an instant and without warning.
This one!
And though you may want to run for cover and spread apart, it isn't always possible. Sometimes you must keep moving forward.
It takes all the nerve a man can muster to stand there and face bullets whistling and cannonballs plowing up the ground under your feet and not turn around and run. Private Alfred Bellard, 5th New Jersey Union Army.
This is all to say that War of Rights is a unique game. It gives you the feeling of a Civil War battle, recreating without danger the risks of every moment that existed in that conflict. That isn't to say that it mimics everything. Missing is the boredom of camp life, the exhaustion of a summer's march, and the hard labor of fatigue work, and the terrible cost of disease that ultimately claimed a third of all Civil War deaths. But it is, after all, a game, and dying of dysentery hasn't been fun since 1985. Anyway, that wraps up this video. I feel like I've only scratched the surface here, so if you would like to see more of this kind of content, please let me know in the comments.